the flickering light of Asia, or the Assyrian nation and church. It is indeed unfortunately true that this Eastern evangelical church, erroneously nicknamed as the Nestorian Church, driven by a perpetual eruption of Islam's wrath, sought refuge in the isolated fastnesses of the high hills and mountains of Kurdistan, and in its isolation lost not only its burning zeal for Christ, but it also sank into illiteracy and ignorance. Nevertheless, as compared with other ancient churches of the East, the Nestorian Church has preserved the purest apostolic teaching. The mind, as it contemplates over the past of this church, to whose zeal no perils presented obstacles, whose influence knew no territorial limits, and whose missionary enterprises embraced all the barbaric lands, from the Chinese seas to the waters of the Persian Gulf, and then undertake to study its present and unfortunate condition, must only reverently bow to the will and the wisdom of God, whose ways no infinite mind can comprehend. What a lamentable portrait of the people as compared with the one seen in the light of the bygone centuries and reflected in the pages of history. That mighty activity which once no national prejudices succeeded to check has now fallen asleep amid the hills of Kurdistan. That productive genius which ennobled the pen of the Nestorian authors is slumbering motionless in the shell of inevitable ignorance. That fertile imagination which decorated the vast pages of their literacy productions lay dormant and buried in pitiful illiteracy. Those famous schools which were once the pride of the nation furnish in their ruins the notes of the bitterest lamentations. How are these things possible? How can they come to pass? There is only one answer so far as the mortal can understand, and that is the perpetual volcano of hate, persecutions and massacres in which the Assyrian church and people have lived for centuries, is responsible for their sad decline. But in spite of this sad and melancholy picture, we turn again to the throne of mercy and thank God the Father of mercies, that he has spared a remnant and preserved a seed for his people. May we not believe that he who overrules all for good has a purpose in persevering a nation through so many centuries of slaughter and bloodshed. May we not believe that he may yet raise from the ruins of the old temple one which is exceedingly better and far surpassing in its beauty and splendor. And may we not hope that the Nestorians may yet be the means of preaching the gospel of their ancestors to their surrounding neighbors who are dying without Christ. Great indeed are possibilities of this church, but the greatest need of the Nestorians now is education. Education to them will act like the sound of resurrection trumpet, awakening the consciousness of the church and giving a new birth to her former missionary aspirations. Education to them will be like the opening of a perennial fountain, from which they will issue again streams of healing waters and reach to the many races now dying without Christ and without hope. Education to the Nestorian church will act like the touch of an electric button that may shed floods of light to expel the darkness that has for centuries covered and enshrouded the very cradle of Christianity and civilization. Assyrian refugees camp in Bakuba, Mesopotamia, saved from starvation by the British government. 250,000 Yazidis of the Shangar Mountains in Mesopotamia are of the Assyrian stock, and during the long regime of the Turkish Empire, they have always had their sympathy with their Christian brothers in flesh. With proper education, they can be brought back into the fold of the mother nation and mother church. The very murderers of the Nestorian patriarch with their chieftain are of the Assyrian origin and race. They were Muslimized during the invasion of the land by the Tartars under the Tamerlane, and to the present day they address the Nestorian patriarch with the endearing term of their uncle. Other Kurdish communities and tribes who have heretofore presented an ethnological mystery are none other than the Assyrian victims of the Tartar invasion and persecution. Education will enlighten the people, and the grace of God through their Nestorian brothers in flesh can rescue them from the bondage of Islam. The now Muslim city of Mar-Agha, situated on the southeastern shore of the Lake of Urmia, was originally Mar-Aha, named after a Nestorian metropolitan, and used as a metropolitan see for this ancient district of the ancient Media. Not far from the city mentioned above, there is a community of 15,000 mysterious Muslims, whose men will never think of covering their dough for fermentation, without first marking over it the sign of the cross. Who are they? And surely infinitely more precious than the antique relics of Nineveh and Babylon. must be the priceless souls of the lost Assyrians to be recovered and reclaimed for God and for the mother Christian nation. An Assyrian school for girls maintained during the Assyrian exile. Such are a few possibilities and prospects of the Nestorian Church. It would be a blasphemy to compare the value of souls with the value of dollars, but humanly speaking, is not this historic church worth an extraordinary effort, if for nothing else but for the sake of making it possible for her to seek and to reclaim the lost Assyrians? Does not the amazing endurance of the people, or their patience in never-ending tribulations, or their unwavering firmness and tenacity in holding on to the cross of Christ in the midst of a sea lashed into constant fury by the hate of men and demons, impel an interest in them deeper than a mere admiration? And does not the loyalty of this church, together with those admirable and unique virtues it still possesses, present a sure promise of immense possibilities and justify an expenditure which means the resurrection of a mighty witness for Christ? Educate the Nestorian Church, and the Nestorian Church will do the rest. If, however, the resurrection of this church is made under God dependent upon education, as we believe education then requires schools, it is absolutely important that the Nestorians should have national schools of their own. The unity, the harmony, and the solidity of the people can in this manner only be maintained, and the self-consciousness of both the people and the church can through such medium only be restored. The first essential step in the holy undertaking is the establishment of a Nestorian church press, greater than the material losses of the Assyrians in the destruction of their literature. Even the library of the Patriarch Marshamun was not spared by the enemy. Fortunately, copies of the Nestorian books and manuscripts can be found here in America, and the most important ones can be replaced. The Nestorians everywhere are in need now of books both for church and schools. In connection with the part of their own literature, the people are in urgent need of modern books. These can be translated and printed in condensed form and be transformed into a spring of knowledge in every home and family as well. It is this deplorable lack of books and mediums for the impartation of knowledge that has placed the Nestorian Church into its present heart-rending plight, and an immediate supply of the same will immediately act like a powerful stimulant and vivify both the church and the people. Herein is the solution of the whole problem under God, and herein is the certain hope of the resurrection of the Assyrian nation, and the restoration of the Eastern Evangelical Church to perform the noble functions it did once perform, and to become once more a mighty power for God and humanity. May we not look for the hour when the new song ascending from the pure hearts shall echo through those historic values, till the mountain top shall catch the flowing joy, and one glad song each heart and tongue employ.